This week on Worldview, the Pegasus project puts the spotlight on cyber surveillance. What is the diplomatic impact of all these revelations? Hello and welcome. I'm Suhasini Haidar at The Hindu, and this is Worldview.
And phones belonging to hundreds of journalists, activists and politicians have been hacked by governments using spyware owned by Israeli surveillance company, the NSO Group.
In the space of a week, 17 media organizations across the world have unloaded the names of thousands of people, mainly journalists, activists, government officials, all of whom were on a list of numbers that were believed to have been targeted for hacking using an Israeli company called NSO's technology called Pegasus. The list was leaked to a French organization called Forbidden Stories, which worked with Amnesty International's tech arm. Now, the revelations are explosive for a number of reasons. To begin with, Pegasus technology is so powerful as a cyber surveillance tool, it is actually classified as a weapon and goes through export clearances as a lethal weapon would from Israel. Once it infects a phone, it can not only read every message and call that goes out, it can turn on the phone remotely to record or put on a camera and record anything that happens near a device without the target's knowledge. Now, NSO, which has denied the list, says it only sells and installs the technology for foreign governments or for their law enforcement agencies. This would imply, if the list is real, that these people were actually under surveillance from governments. And that is the most important part about this, that the surveillance that we're speaking about is not corporate surveillance or rogue elements or hackers. We're talking about state-sponsored cyber surveillance here. Thirdly, 10 countries were seen as the most concentrated areas of the targets, and that implied that people in those countries were being hacked by a government. The suspicion, of course, is it was their own governments who had the most reason to do so, just looking at the various kind of targets that we've seen there. Apart from India, the list of countries really speaks for themselves. It includes Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Morocco, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, and the United Arab Emirates, UAE. So those are the 10 countries being looked at most closely. Fourthly, NSO and the Israeli government have repeatedly said that Pegasus as a technology is really meant to track down only the most wanted terrorists and criminals. The invasion of privacy that it involves clearly is only warranted because of that purpose. Yet a majority, if not nearly all the numbers that have been tracked in this list really belong to civil society, they belong to government officials, politicians, particularly political opposition leaders as well, not to dreaded criminals or rogue elements. In India, for example, of the 115 names that have been released so far, 40 are journalists, 40 are civil rights activists, 14 are politicians, including ministers of the current government and the Minister of Information Technology himself. Globally, there are 10 heads of state or former heads of state that are on various lists. In fact, at least 180 journalists were found amongst 50,000 telephone numbers believed to be the targets that were chosen by various clients of the company NSO ever since 2016. Now, many of you are looking at this and saying, this all sounds very familiar. Hasn't this happened before? And yes, it has. This is not the first time such revelations have come about with such far-reaching consequences, really. And of course, the most famous was in the early 1970s, from 72 to 74, the Watergate scandal, which led to the impeachment and to the resignation of US President Richard Nixon, when it emerged that the Republican government had authorized the bugging of the Democratic National Convention's offices just ahead of Nixon's re-election campaign. Then there were a series of WikiLeaks revelations from about 2011 that have revealed government databases. They've put out manuals on surveillance all the way from US to Syria to Turkey, France, all kinds of countries, in fact. These have led to many prosecutions and lawsuits on human rights violations and the procedural lapses that are involved. Then in 2013, the Snowden papers came out. Documents revealed by a former American technology contractor revealed the extent of surveillance by the US National Security Agency, the NSA, on citizens and foreign nationals that led to a full overhaul of the NSA's, in fact, contracts with private technology firms all came under sharp scrutiny. And now there's the Pegasus project. This adds a new dimension, actually. Technology purportedly sold by one country to other countries to conduct the most insidious surveillance. Now, while surveillance, and most cynics will tell you, this is a fact of life, the ease of using Pegasus technology without any checks and balances, it would seem, is what appears really to make this different, to make this the international scandal that it has begun. The question then, is this going to have any impact if surveillance is so widespread? So let's just take a look at what countries have said in reaction. Of course, most countries, particularly India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, have flatly denied any wrongdoing. They've said all the charges put out are baseless, but very significantly, they've not denied contracting for Pegasus technology. So they've not denied that they are on the list of countries that have actually bought the Pegasus technology. The use is different. The lists of numbers are different from that. Second, Israel's new government has reportedly ordered an inquiry, set up a special commission to look into whether policy changes are needed for the export of surveillance technology, which of course is one of Israel's most powerful exports. Defense Minister Benny Gantz has stressed that the technology is only sold to governments for legal use. In fact, these are called vetted governments, and they are cleared by the Israeli government themselves. Those countries must meet the terms, really, of the licenses. And Mr. Gantz has said that if licenses of those who have been found in violation could be cancelled. France has ordered a series of inquiries into surveillance of its citizens, including President Macron and his cabinet. The UK is considering an inquiry. There's been talk in Parliament, really, given that about 400 UK citizens are supposed to be on the list. Some allegations that they were under surveillance from NSO clients in the UAE. Algeria's public prosecutor has also ordered an inquiry. The government is accusing, or others in the country are accusing Morocco of targeting Algerian citizens. Azerbaijan's government has in fact been silent so far, but activists in Azerbaijan have threatened to sue NSO as a company itself. In Hungary, where Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government is accused of using Pegasus on its critics, it's supposed to be a very heavy-handed government, the Budapest Regional Investigation Prosecutor's Office has said it will investigate the Pegasus case for the suspected crime of gathering unauthorized secret information. Now, in India, where the government has not given in yet to demands for a full inquiry, in fact, it's denying that there is any wrongdoing, and much of the allegations are pure speculation, India too faces a diplomatic fallout. To begin with, the names on the Pegasus project list really include Delhi-based diplomats and employees of various countries. The US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, for example, their employees are on the list. The UK British High Commission's political counselor is on the list. The ambassadors and top diplomats of Afghanistan, Iran, Nepal, China, Pakistan are all on the list. And of course, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan is also supposed to be on the list. Now, while surveillance of diplomats and any kind of this kind of spying activities on foreign nationals is not uncommon. It is meant to detect espionage. The truth is that the cardinal rule is not to get found out, especially when it comes to nationals of friendly countries, diplomats of friendly countries based in your country. And this, of course, could lead to a strain in ties with those particular countries. Secondly, if the Israeli investigation into the use of Pegasus software were to find that the Indian government has, in fact, as some are alleging, has misused the technology meant to target rogue agents, this could impact bilateral ties. Remember, as part of the investigation, Pegasus surveillance, the sale of the technology has been tied to countries where former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited or had meetings. For example, in India, it has been tied to the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Israel in 2017, and to Mr. Netanyahu's visit to India subsequently in 2018. The current Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, was of course a minister in the previous government, even so could distance his new government from the contracts, given that so many revelations have come out. Remember, in India, if done by the book, surveillance under India's IT Act, Section 69, can only be a time-bound one. It is ordered under strict supervision. nodal authorities. And it can only be carried out in the interest of the sovereignty of integrity of India, defense of India, security of the state, in favor of friendly relations with foreign states, public order problems, preventing incitement of offenses, investigation of offenses. So these are the only cases in which you can order this kind of surveillance. So most significantly, when it comes to the diplomatic fallout, it is about the diplomatic image of India as a democracy. If the Pegasus project allegations are proven, they would show that the government in India was snooping, and in fact only on its critics and those of its own members and allies that it had under suspicion for other political purposes, and this at considerable taxpayers' expense. So that would be very damaging for India's reputation as a law-abiding democracy, and this would be global. The story is clearly far from over. We'll continue to track the diplomatic implications of the Pegasus project, its revelations, also the issue of cyber surveillance and privacy that is a growing one across the world. Now, we do have some book recommendations for you. Remember, I spoke about those previous surveillance scandals, and the best book, of course, is All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, the two journalists who made those revelations and of course are revered by journalists around the world. Then there are more stories by, for example, the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange. It's called the WikiLeaks File, The World According to US Empire, and When Google Met WikiLeaks. These are both by Assange or have contributions from him. There's Permanent Record by Edward Snowden as well, a very interesting account which is non-technical. And finally, there is The Art of Deception, Controlling the Human Element of Security. This is by Kevin Mitnick. Also other books by this particular author. Remember, he was actually in prison, convicted in the US for being a hacker, and now is a world-renowned cybersecurity specialist. That's all we have time for here on Worldview, but from the team here, thanks for joining us. Do join us again.